Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course, people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen, and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. And you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and FutureNetZero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Now, on this podcast, we've had loads of fantastic speakers over the years, and we continue to do so. But the main part of it is, frankly, stop talking shit. Let's communicate. We've tried to do that with this podcast from the beginning, to bring you ideas that are either complicated or perhaps things that are misunderstood, and try and clarify them for you from every topic. But one of the main things we haven't really talked about is communication itself. And that's what we're going to do today with a man who's the most dapper scientist, I think. He gives Neil deGrasse Tyson a run for his money with his style. I'm joined from America by Dr. Frederic Bertley. I've got to get it right rather than Bentley, who is the boss of something called COSI, the Center for Science and Industry. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining me on this early morning for you and late afternoon for me, Fred.
Good morning, Sumit. Dr. B. Bowes. A pleasure to meet you.
I love it.
You on the screen.
Well, I'm going to call you Dr. B. I like it. For us over here, particularly, I'm sure we've got American listeners and viewers who might know what COSI or COSI is. Can you explain what it is? And I know your anniversary is coming up very soon. So just give us a little idea of what it is that the institution you work for, why it was set up and what it does.
That's right. We are the Center of Science and Industry, COSI. We are 60 years old or 60 years young, and we are in Central Ohio. We are in the city of Columbus, which is the capital of the great state of Ohio. And we are a science museum. So if you think of your London Museum of Science or your Natural History Museum of London, we are like that. We're a combination of a science museum and natural history. We have both really cool old dinosaurs and then really great hands-on, exciting, engaging science and engineering stuff. And that's what we do. And we're thrilled that we have won in the last 6 years. 5 out of the last 6 years, we have won the #1 science museum in the entire United States. And in 2023, we won the highest award the United States government gives. It's called the National Medal, and we receive it. It's always given to us or presented to you at the White House. And so we have that we have that arrow in our quiver. And then lastly, and I love that you talked about science communication. That's one thing we take very seriously. And I'm proud to say that our team have won 9 Emmy Awards for our science communication products.
This is the thing that's really interesting. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s where science was a new thing. I suppose, I remember, seeing a little bit of the Soyuz Apollo, the shuttle, Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. It was very, very big. And then we had science shows, and I'm sure you probably had them in America, but there weren't many because there wasn't much choice. So, and it was very, I suppose the thing that was very interesting was it was very well researched material that was given to you by people who had a science background or were researched by science. Move forward 40 years and science is everywhere, right? You can watch any video on YouTube, but there's no kind of verification of where this comes from. And this is the thing that people, scientists, like I could sort of call myself a pseudoscientist, had a science degree, but there's always that thing about checking and stuff. Before we get into what you're doing, as a man, a younger man than me, but who grew up in that same generation, is that something similar you've seen, which is there was less communication in some ways, but it was more factual. And now there's a plethora of things that seem more confusing.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to praise you for making me happy by calling out Battlestar Galactica. That just warms my heart that you actually remember that. But to the matter and material of your question, you are absolutely spot on. In the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, we had information. The internet was coming online, but you went to what we call primary sources, Encyclopedia Britannica, the World Book, what have you, textbooks that we used to
Yeah.
print these things called books, and you'd have words in them. And that's where the source material was.
Yeah.
Very fact-based. It'd been in the case of science content, it's tested by numerous scientists in the field. So by the time it publishes, it's considered peer-reviewed. So we think this is as close to the facts as we know. But to your point, layer in these computers we have in our pockets, these cell
Yeah.
phones, and the dawn of instant connectivity through the modern day library, Google, right? You have access to an infinite panacea of information. And so the ability to navigate that infinite information is hard. That's one. Two, online, everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
And so back in the day, we had this thing called experts and expertise, right? Like if you're going to the loo in the UK and the toilet's not working, well, don't call Dr. B, don't call Frederic Bertley, call a plumber. If
Yeah.
your car doesn't work and it breaks down, call an auto mechanic. If you need heart surgery, call a cardiothoracic surgery. We have this thing called expertise. But for some reason, when it comes to science and whether you're
Yes.
talking about vaccines or genetically modified organisms or climate science, everybody has an opinion. And
Yeah.
now I'll give you an example. I love Oprah as a figure. She's an amazing
Yeah.
entrepreneur, incredible businesswoman, etc. But she's not an expert on vaccines.
No.
But when she puts on a tweet or an X or some kind of thing on social media that says, "Oh, I think vaccines are good or worse, not good," she's
Yeah.
got a massive audience. And because she's famous, she's an instant expert. So that, to your point, the fact that everybody can have a voice on this thing called the internet and ones and zeros, there's so much information, it's hard to navigate that. And so even though there's more communication, there's a greater amount of, to quote you, BS and
Yeah.
just noise in that space.
And that's the thing that is, I think, very confusing. And let's talk about climate. We might as well, the whole thing that is the climate science, I remember pollution, right? And then I remember the words, it was called global warming, right? And then it became climate change, all of this stuff.
Mhm.
But nearly all of it was based, I worked at the BBC in the science department. We'd go and find scientists at
Mhm.
prestigious universities. We'd talk to people in America, around the world. You'd get research papers, then someone would try and translate that into something we communicate.
That's right.
Nowadays, anyone can take something, misread it or misquote it, or maybe not even understand it, and say
Mhm.
that's a theory.
Mhm.
We'll talk about the specifics of climate science and what's misunderstood about it now. But where's that blame come from? Because there are also these pseudoscientists. I wouldn't even say that they're scientists probably, but they suddenly put themselves as kind of celebs who, like you say, get those clicks.
Mhm.
When did this all change? You've had a career in science all your life. When did you see this change happening?
Yeah, when you talk about science communication, there are several different hot buttons and levers. Some are just science for the pure sake of scientific research.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, we understand DNA. Watson and Crick, your
yeah,
famous British folks discovered the DNA. Shout out to Rosalind Franklin. She was the third person that helped them.
absolutely.
Like that's DNA, that's content. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
But there are other things that are really connected to, I don't want to just say industry, but money.
yeah,
The big issues with climate science is the data is absolutely clear, right? Yes, people like to say, "Oh, well, I found a scientist that says climate science is not a thing." Fair enough, right?
yeah,
Like we have 8 billion people on the planet. You're going to find one or
yeah,
two or 1% of scientists, but if 99.9% of scientists are saying climate change is a thing, it's a thing, right? And so that's not the issue. The issue is it's connected to a change in behavior, which is connected to, a reduction of money in certain people's pockets, big industry. So if there was no impact on a financial aspect, people would be like, sure, we'll figure out climate. Let's reduce the CFLs. Let's reduce this. Let's reduce that. Let's save the planet. Let's go. But to do it, and I know you want to talk about the kind of the business angle here,
yeah.
but to really mediate what's happening with climate science and to reduce, the inevitable impact that might come in the future and help save our planet, there is a financial cost. And I want to be clear, it doesn't mean rich industries won't make any money. It just
Of
means
course.
you're going to make less money, and
Yeah.
people don't like that. And that's where the disconnect comes.
Ah,
Some
ah,
people, yeah, some people think it's about the science, and we're not sure. We're 100% crystal clear. The data is we have data since 1900s. since 1890. The data is clear. It's what do we do with that data now that we know it exists?
Let's take a couple of those points which you've made. It was very interesting. And I'll split them into two. I'll call it one sort of professional, one called amateur, right?
Mhm.
The professional problem is I'm a oil and gas company, and I think that fracking's great and it won't harm the planet, right? And then I could be a completely different kind of scientist who's very much into conservation of the earth and go, well, it's really bad. And then I get paid as another scientist by an oil and gas company or by a eco group. And what you do get is this constant kind of tension because an eco group will pay a scientist who says it's all crap, it's all shit. And then
Mhm.
an oil and gas company will pay a scientist who says there's nothing wrong with it. So in
Mhm.
a way, and you said it there, science is often pull, give and take, and ideas get changed and theories get changed. But that's where a lot of people have a problem with trusting the science is that who's funding it. Can you see how that's
Well,
happened?
and I love that you brought that up. And that's something that your audience, the world needs to appreciate.
Yeah,
All science is a process of being very Socratic. You're curious about something, so you
yeah,
ask a question, as Socrates did,
yeah,
and then you try to find an answer. In the case of science, you find an answer by doing experiments in the natural universe, in the natural world, and try to get information. And based on that information, you start making conclusions. And the more information you get, and the more people you have processing that information, the closer you get to the truth, the closer you get to, okay, this has actually gone from a theory to this is actually what's happening. This is real. It's no longer theoretical. We know the data. The problem is science doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's us
yeah,
human beings that do it. And so my father, who's the original Dr. B, he used to tell us as a kid, son, always remember humans aren't logical, they're psychological.
yeah,
And that's what we're dealing with. So when you have, to your point, people looking at the same data, on the one hand, the
yeah.
eco, yes, this is bad for the environment, but you have someone who has a different interest, meaning they're psychologically motivated by their personal needs or what have you, or making money, whatever the case is. They're looking at that data and they're forming a different conclusion. But the data is the data, and 2 + 2 is equal to 4. Some people will say it's 4, other people will say it's 5. If you're paid $10 billion, Sumit Dr. B. Bose, to tell people 2 + 2 is equal to 5, I promise you, you'll
I've
start
been
telling people 2
telling
is
of it.
equal to 5. Right? There you go. And that's what we're dealing with. And
So how do we navigate that? Because this is a problem for us, isn't it? Because politicians get a lot of blame, right? And you got Trump right now. We've had, got Starmer over here. You've got. It doesn't matter who the politician is, whether they're red, blue, green, purple. It doesn't matter what they are. Politicians rule our lives because they make policies that affect us, but they're being influenced massively so by lobbyists of either side. And some would say, there's a green zealousy we've got right now with the current energy secretary in the UK. And then you could say there's an absolute fossil fuel crazy in the White House right now.
Yep, yep.
But both of them will be using scientists to back what they're saying. And so this is the point I'm trying to get to, Fred, is where has that gone? Because before I think we used to, it's like we used to trust the doctor, we used to trust the scientists.
Mhm.
That has definitely changed. And I just wanted to know when you think that started to happen.
Yeah, so it definitely started happening in the '90s into the new millennium. For that
Right.
was that period. And then so that was that period. Then layer on something like a global pandemic 20 years later in 2020, that's where the wheels really fell off around science, around confidence in science and
Yes.
scientists, etc. Because there was so much misinformation. In the case of the US, one
Conflicting.
day you're hearing one thing
Yeah.
from the expert, the next day you're hearing another thing, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, you can't. And so that led the average person who has no science experience to say, well, jeepers, these quote unquote experts keep changing their mind. You know what? Maybe science isn't bulletproof like I thought it was. So, okay, fine. With that said, going back to what we're talking about, climate science, oh, that's still bulletproof. And to your point about who's in the White House or who's somewhere else, who's on 10 Downing Street, it's what the advice to the public is look at basically bring common sense to the equation. Look at the propensity of scientists supporting one another. So you're
Yeah.
right. People can find, let's say the White House being fossil fuels, you can find a scientist or two, but it's not a 50-50 ratio.
Gotcha.
99.9% of scientists who are researchers in environment, in climate science, in geothermal stuff, who are in that space of climate stuff, They are 99.9% in agreement that this is bad, this is real, this is bad, and it's going to get worse. And we have a date where if we don't get it right by that date, we'll be in problems. Now, there is that 0.1%, but if you're a reasonable person and you understand that that's only 0.1%, you can't possibly say, I'm going to listen to that. Right. And so the politicians and the lobbyists will pull from that because they have other interests. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, there is no confusion and it's not a 50-50 equal. It's not a husband and wife trying to get divorced and think about who gets the house or not. This is like 99% of the people know this is true. And you get a few people over here. So, now beyond that, well, I'll pause there. I'll pause there and take your next
No,
question.
no, I get what you're saying. So let's take the other half of the equation, which is the amateurs, right? Which I
Yep.
said, first of all, there's a scientist, and I think we know where we are. You can find lobbyists, like you said, who choose science that backs their argument. But the other problem is, which I think is on the other side, particularly on the green side. So we have groups like Just Stop Oil who've just sort of said they're going to hang up their coats for a while, but Greenpeace has been around for many years. There are global groups. You have American environmental groups. And there are people who are so zealous who basically say you can't have any life. You
Yeah.
shouldn't fly, shouldn't drive a car, shouldn't be wearing these clothes, shouldn't eat meat, all of that. Because again, they take science and then they've extrapolated. How
Mhm.
do we deal with that? Because that is also a very kind of, just as much as those climate deniers are mad, in
Mhm.
my view, these people are making it very difficult for ordinary people because they get judged on everything they do.
Dr. B, 100% correct. So in math, we talk about a normal distribution or a Gaussian distribution, basically a
Yeah,
bell curve, right?
bell curve.
In
Yeah,
terms of humans, kind of where they land on something like climate science or vaccines, you have those that we talk about 95%. So like 2.5% on one side and 2.5% on the other side, totaling 5%. That you're just not going to change those people. And
yeah,
so when you're talking about a super far left green person who's making you feel bad because you want to grab a bottle of water, because you're thirsty,
exactly.
like you're never going to change them and they're a problem. Same thing on the other side. And we have this thing in neuroscience called cognitive dissonance. No matter how much you hear the data and the facts, your brain is wired in a certain way that you won't connect the dots because you're, for lack of a better word, brainwashed into believing X. And so there's a disconnect between the cognitive reality and what you're perceiving to be true. And so you have that on those extremes. I just be honest, there's nothing you can do for both of the sides. Now, the good
No.
news is that's not the majority of the people, right? The majority of us, the majority of the 8 billion people on the planet, including the amateurs, as you talked about, we're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And so this is where, back to the thesis of this show, this is where communication is so important. And this is where my colleagues, my tribe, scientists and engineers, we own not all of the blame by any stretch, but we have to own some of the blame
You
because
do.
we
Yeah.
think we're smarter than everybody else. We
Yeah.
speak in a vocabulary with big Latin words that 12 other people around the world understand, and we think that makes us smarter. And so we alienate everybody. And you know this. Nobody wants to be made to feel stupid or
No.
dumb. No
No.
one wants to be embarrassed. So in terms of myself and COSI, we understand that one, the data is the data, but you have to be able to connect with the
Yeah.
person, meet them where they're at, and most importantly, respect their opinion. The minute they think you're
Oh,
the elitist left or elitist right or an expert this, they're not even listening. They've turned you off because they feel bad. No one wants to feel bad. And so if you can break bread with somebody, if you can get them to see that you are authentically, sincerely valuing their opinion,
yeah.
and then you just want to show kind of some information and try to ask questions about the information and try to get them to see a different perspective without shaming them or making them feel bad. I want to be clear, you have a chance at getting them to hear the fact and perhaps even changing an opinion one way or the other.
I think the truth is most business people, in fact, I mean, this is really a business show, but we'll do that. But I think most people will get the fact that we're screwing the planet, right? Let's basically, we're there. And I think most people that we've met would try and do less damage, right? And that might be they change to an EV if they can afford it, which is very expensive. But it might be they just go, I'm just going to do less waste or I'm going to change some things. What people hate is being lectured. And
Yep.
there's a real problem. So we've done a little bit about the right. I want to focus a little bit on the left. There's a real problem, Greta. who was there, and even to an extent, Al Gore, great guy, says a lot of good things, but it makes you feel crap. It makes you feel like it's doomsday.
Yeah,
There's this thing that we have, I don't know if you got it in America, but people saying there's loads of young people with sort of climate phobia. They're feeling worried about the Earth's going to
yeah,
end tomorrow, all of this kind of thing because they've been told it's all doom, that the world is burning, the world is falling. But that's not the case.
yeah,
There's a lot of things that are happening, but it's not the end. So
yeah,
how do we make sure that the business people, that the parents of today try not to make their children feel so that it's all despair. And yet we do know there are things going on that are terrible. And we can see fires that have happened in America, the stuff that's going on with sea rises. We can see all of that. We know there's a thing. It's very hard, isn't it, for
yeah,
ordinary people to go, I get it, but I've got to try and keep living the life I've got.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you are spot on, and there are several confounding issues, and that's we don't exist in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
So if we existed and all we did as individuals, the layperson, was just dealing with one little thing, okay, we might not be so melancholic about the planet. The problem is today in 2025, geopolitically, socially, financially, the average person in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, in the US, we're dealing with a lot of SH hockey stick T. We're dealing with a lot of stuff. And
Yeah.
so, I'm not making enough money. My kids I can't pay for kids in college. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, the political system is crazy. What's this?
There are
And so
queues
then
at the
you rely
hospital.
on
Yeah, there's
something
no
like,
Medicare.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you got some lefty telling you, oh, by the way, your fault you're burning down a planet.
Yeah.
You're right. We're walking around with heavy heads. And so it's really an aggregate of so many tough things that we're in. We're not in the dark ages yet, but as we study things in history like dark ages, I start to see how you can get there as a
Oh, yeah.
society, as a nation, right? And so now with that said, there is something that's so important I just want to say out loud on your show because it's a business show.
True.
And I'm on record as saying it. The fact of the matter is, if you and I put CFLs in our house and put these low flow water, adjustments on our faucets and whatnot, and we always make sure we turn off the lights and we're really stingy on our that, I'll just be blunt, and I'm not giving this as a license to your audience to not care. But the fact of the matter is, it's not us regular individuals that can really move the needle. It is unfortunately a drop in the bucket. If all your listeners and viewers are going to turn off the lights early and stuff, that's admirable conceptually. That's not the big issues globally are the big companies that are generating all these that are using these fossil fuels and generating all these things in the atmosphere. That's leading to that. So we can do all we want as an individual.
Yep.
That's not going to change anything if the big corporate America, corporate Europe, etc., the folks that are playing in these spaces that are impacting the climate, if they can reduce just by a little,
Yeah.
that will solve a lot of our problems. We're not suggesting someone don't make your boatloads of money, but instead of making 100 billion,
Yeah.
could you make 99 billion and save the planet?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And so the fact, and I love how you framed it, the fact that a lot of us are walking around as individuals heavy-handed and to quote
Yeah.
you, the young people have the gloom and doom. Shame on society for putting that on
Yeah.
young kids. Not our fault, and it's certainly
No,
not that younger generation's fault.
no,
It's just not.
absolutely. I
And
totally
just
agree with
because you
you.
use a cell phone, don't say, well, then don't use your cell phone. No, the cell phone companies can still do a lot, make the cell phones to make your and my life happy, but still impact better the environment.
That is exactly it. And I think it's all down to business doing it and knowing that they can still make money. Let's talk about a couple of other things while we still have time, which I think are very important. The I suppose the way I see it is there is more communication now than we've ever had, right? I can read the news that's happening in your state right now. I can check out your weather. I can see everything in everywhere around the world. I can speak to friends around the world.
Mhm.
And yet, I see more polarization than ever. And that is particularly strong on things like social media. It's particularly strong on videos you can watch, which can influence younger people.
Mhm.
It's affecting everything. How has that polarization affected science communication as well?
Absolutely. The reason why we're feeling that is back to the beginning part of our conversation. There used to be this thing called experts, where we had an understanding in society, just like, if you're an Arsenal fan, I mean, who's playing on Arsenal, or who's playing on the Hotspurs, or who's playing on Man U, right? These are pros, they're experts. Well, the internet equivalent to that is everybody can make Arsenal, right? So
Yeah.
now the internet is now everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker, and you can hide. So you have a voice, but no one has to know who you are. So
Mm.
now you're getting all this stuff thrown in this vortex of this thing called the internet. And it's a lot of negative content or polarizing content. In the past, we wouldn't accept that because the Encyclopedia Britannica
Yeah.
wouldn't publish it, or the
Absolutely.
professors at Oxford, Cambridge, or McGill or Harvard wouldn't talk about it in class. But today, everything is out there. And again, being not logical, being psychological as human beings with emotions and feelings, we gravitate towards things that are hot buttons and get us excited. And that leads to polarization. And now you're in this camp or that camp. And what's really interesting is there used to be two camps. In the US, you're either red or blue, right? Now there's 200 camps.
Correct.
In the right, I mean, I'll speak for where I live in the US, the Republican Party. You got extremes all across that thing. And again, there's so many authors, there's so
Yeah.
much unchecked information, and people just go on something that they like. And because a lot of us are struggling with our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month survival, we want to get on something that allows us to blame somebody else because it's never our own fault. And then we get into these different tribes, which leads to polarization.
You've got young kids who walk into your museum, right?
Mhm.
6, 7 years old, full of wonder. Um, how do you, as an institute, try and keep these kids, these future scientists, these future business people, these future doctors, nurses, whoever, firemen, people who are going to make our lives in the future? How do you keep them uh, understanding the truth? And that's the thing. The thing I always loved about science is there was a truth, right? You do the equation, it only comes out that way, right? The
Mhm.
animal grows only that way, right? And then
Yeah,
you can fiddle with it fine, but you know the reason why you fiddle with it.
yeah,
With all the stuff they're bombarded with now, I've got a little 6-year-old and he watches videos that tell him weird things about kind of how animals. I'm like, that's not right. It's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
rubbish.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's out there and it's entertaining. It's a zany kid, and he's going, oh, that's it. How do you, as purveyors of great science and proper facts, when kids and young people come into your institution and adults as well, but concentrate on them, how do you make sure you engage them? Because they might think, God, a museum's boring. I could just watch a video game that shows me the science.
Well, I love it. And you used the absolute correct term. That's the answer. You have to be entertaining. The problem is, the
Yeah,
problem is the lion's share of entertainment out there isn't necessarily entertainment around really interesting sciencey, engineering, natural phenomena, right?
yeah,
And so there's a lot of entertainment that grabs people's attention, but in our case at COSI, what we're really good at doing is making science and engineering and really cool understand, because everybody likes to understand something.
of course.
Everybody from a little kid, that's how you learn to walk. That little kid who first does their first steps, look at their face. No baby is walking across the room to their mom and dad with a frown on their face. Everyone's got a big smile, right? You're
Yeah.
discovering something new. Everybody loves that. So what we figured out is, okay, we want to communicate this science thing, or we want to communicate why a career in science for the future or a career in engineering might be good. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to break down this stuff in a way that you are so blown away that you love it. I'll give you an example. Okay. I do this all the time with kids as young as 5 years old. And I'll start with you though as an adult. If I were to show on a screen to you and your listeners
Yeah.
equation, a
Mm.
mathematical equation, f of x is equal to, are you ready for the term that makes everybody go run?
Good.
Log x base.
Hey.
All right. If I throw that on a screen, at least in American Canada, everybody, adults go running. Exactly. Like, oh my God, you wrote log, logs. Oh, I'm scared. All right, fine. Yet I can go to, and you can do this experiment. I do this all the time. I can go to kids as young as 4 or 5 years old. And I say, hey, how many of y'all want $1? Dr. B is going to give you $1. Oh, me. And there might be, 100 kids in the room. Okay, how many of you kids want $10? Oh, me. And I actually pull out money from my pocket. How many kids want $100? The kids are like running around, telling their parents, Dr. B's, give me $100. And then I say, how about I give you $1,000? The kids go ape shit. They lose their minds. They're like, COSI's the best. Dr. B's the best. He's giving us $1,000. And they're 4 or 5 years old. They immediately understood that equation. F of x is equal to log x base 10. Why? It's growth or logarithmic increase by 10. A
Gotcha.
dollar, $10, $100, and
Yeah.
$1,000. And when you do it, right? They have no idea it's this equation of f of x, and they don't care about that, but they intimately understand it. So when scientists and science communicators can find really clever and interesting and exciting dynamic ways to share natural phenomena, they love it. So now I got kids all over Columbus that love math. Why? Because I connected to money. Even little kids know about money and they see the value. And so that's what we do really well. We take the supposedly difficult to understand, we make it sexy for the older adults, for the adults, sorry, and we make it super exciting and interesting for the kiddos all the way up to adulthood to get them hooked. And then once they learn it, there's no going back. I have not met somebody who's learned something, especially on the science side, who's really understood it that doesn't feel like, worth $1 billion.
Two things I want to talk about, which is I want to talk about young people in the renewable energy space in a second, but
Yep.
globally, right? If you look at the world, as I say often on the podcast, my family is from India, and India's got everything. It's got like incredible bio, nanotech, and computers, all that, and there are people still, living in destitute poverty. You look at sub-Saharan Africa, you look at South America, you look at parts of Asia, look at the world, Africa, of course. You've got a whole bunch of people who are living with climate change, right? Living with the effects of it. And then you have this lecturing that says, well, we shouldn't be flying there, or you shouldn't be using plastic, and then they've got plastic everywhere, right? There are people who are reusing things and all of that because they have to. Again, there's this disconnect, I feel, with this climate message, which it seems to be a very first world climate message, right? Like you say, turn down your thermostat 2 degrees and get an EV and drink water out of a glass rather than a plastic bottle. But if you're trying to walk 4 miles for water, you don't give a damn what it's coming in.
Yep.
How do we as a society, and maybe I don't know if science is guilty of this, we seem to have these things which are brilliantly done in labs and things and ideas, but where it matters in places where they haven't got those resources, the disconnect is there. And they go, well, screw your ideas in climate change. I want coal because I want to be hot. I want to cook my food.
Yep.
How do we deal with that?
Well, so that's such a great question. There are quite a few points, but I'm going to talk about two fundamental points. One is you have to know your audience.
Yeah.
If someone is starving or dying of thirst, you nailed it. They don't care if it was made out of a coal, burning fur. They don't care if it's in 3-layered plastic bottles. They're thirsty. So what you're talking about is not a science or cognition or even communication issue. What you're talking about is a health and wellness situation.
Yes.
People who are starving, people who are dying of thirst, people who are dying from diseases, people who don't have housing, they have no time to worry about your first world issue about that. They have no time of that. So we got to figure out that problem. That's A. B, we also need to understand it's also not their damn fault. Because that person who's starving or dying of thirst or suffering from crazy disease in their community or society, they ain't the ones building those power plants that are generating all the bad stuff. So shame on us further to be putting it on them, right? So those are two fundamental things. The third piece is, and this might not be popular, but that's where the concept, and I'm choosing my words carefully.
Say what you want to feel. This podcast, say it as it is.
You got it. That's where the concept of government is really important. Because if the survival of the world is left to all 8.1 billion people on the planet to figure stuff out, we're not going to survive, right? Because we're my family, right? When is the last time other people talk about, oh, I really worried about my neighbor's kids? Worry about your kids. You can help your neighbor's kids, but you don't bother you, right? So that's where government in the proper function and description and definition of what a government should be is that it's a collective group of folks. It's a
Yeah.
body, it's an organization that is not looking out for the individual, but is looking out for society in general. And so if the companies aren't going to reduce their emissions, well, that's where you got government regulations, which is not popular, right, for those who are making money. But the government's like, hey, we've got to tone this down a little bit.
Yeah.
So now government has taken a bath across this planet in the last 15 years. I mean, it's gone bananas with how these governments are doing their work, if you will. But conceptually, that's where you need a more autonomous, broader group, an organization, government, what have you, that's looking out for society, for community, etc. But to put it on the people who are, suffering second
Yeah.
and third world issues is absolutely ridiculous. That person starving in Ethiopia is just off the
They
top.
don't care if it's a a
Yeah,
coal Jenny, pouring
that's right.
diesel into a generator. They want the heat. I get it.
That's right.
Younger people, and I mean sort of younger people who are starting their careers now, in the UK, and I don't know in the US, but there are a lot of people who like the idea of working in this clean energy space, the renewable energy space. I think fusion is fantastic. I think it's going to be amazing. It's the stuff I've dreamt of, and it's coming closer and closer. People are working in wind farms. People are looking at different technologies. They seem to be very sensible young people when I meet them, and they are contesting this kind of narrative that it's all shit and it's all bad and you're all guilty and you do that. How do we encourage those people, the bright future, to stick on their path? Because a lot of people they go into this thing and say they join, I don't know, let's choose a big oil company, say they join Exxon or they join BP, but they're doing work in trying to find ways of reducing pollution. There'll be a whole bunch of people say you should never work for them, right? Or they're working with, I don't know, a Chinese company and something, and people say, well, hang on, that you shouldn't be working for them. It's so difficult now for people who are trying to work in this energy space and do good things. And most of the people I've met, I'm sure like you have, they have good intentions trying to do good things to fight this narrative that says you shouldn't be doing it, right? We shouldn't be touching it. Yeah.
Mhm.
How do we help those people?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. So remember we talked about that 5% at the edges of that
Yeah.
curve. So there are some people that start off young, get to college, get out of college, and go to the grave. Oh my God, this is bad stuff, just terrible
Yeah.
stuff, trying to do that. That ends up being that little band. It's no surprise that revolutionaries rather, are young folks, right? I mean, you're in college, right? You're in college, you're on campus, you got all the vices of a typical campus. Yeah, power to people. Yeah, down with the
Yeah, of
environment.
course.
Yeah, this and that. Then you graduate. Oh, got a little student debt.
Yeah.
Oh, you find a partner,
Yeah.
probably get married.
Yeah.
Oh, squeeze out one of those parasites called a child, and then you have a couple children. And now, as they say in the US, pardon my expression, but shit's getting real.
It's getting real.
And
Yeah.
so now you got a subset of those folks who are really passionate about doing the right thing. A subset of those are like, well, I really do care, but you know what? I care about feeding myself, my partner, my kiddos. And so now I'm going to take that job at BP.
Correct.
I'm going to take that job at Exxon.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, it's, and so it's, it's if we find and the good news is if there's a little bit of will from the power brokers and the big industry partners, if we were to commit like with a capital C to an industry that is more green, that
Yes.
can do this, you
Yeah.
can still make your money. For example, I mean, the richest person in the world, one of the reasons he's super rich, and I know it's taking a bath right now, but he was one of the first people to really figure out electric
Of
cars,
course.
right?
Of course.
Electric cars haven't solved the problem today, but in 50 years from now, if every vehicle, truck, car, anything that's driving on the road is 100% electric, that will have a massive positive impact, right?
Cool.
So what are the technological industries that can make a lot of money, but offer a lot of jobs where you can still keep your commitment to whatever your cause is and still have a good job. Right now it's hard, right? Because if you're working for you talked about Greenpeace. Well, I don't even know if you work for Greenpeace or if it's still a volunteer situation versus you're an
No,
executive.
the people get paid. Yeah, I know. It's all
Or you're
changed.
like Greenpeace money or Exxon money, right? And so if we can have Greenpeace money or Company X and Company Y that are doing really cool things, but that are paying engineers, that are paying administrative assistants, 120,000 pounds, or $100,000 US, like okay, they'll take those jobs. But right now, it's like if you're staying in that lane right
Yeah,
now, there's still not enough to support the multitude of young people who are super passionate
yeah.
but grow out of that. I'm on my daddy and mommy's payroll, called me out of college, and now I got to do for self. Something's got to give.
But the transition I think is underway, and I wanted before we end, what your thoughts are about this kind of thing. We've done a sort of negativity, we've done some positivity. Let's end with kind of where we are now, right? So we're the same generation. We grew up kind of, that sort of. I think there was a real kind of openness from the 70s and 80s. Suddenly the world expanded, travel, computers, all of that. And it seems to be we've had no real massive jumps. We've just had expansions of it.
Mhm.
But clean energy, you know, free, fossil free world could be around for the next generation, less pollution, hopefully cleaning up our planet. I feel that there's still some good out there despite all the negative messages. How do you inspire when you go to work today or tomorrow? How will you think about the next 10, 20 years and tell those kids who come in your museum, hey, it's not all crap. There's some good stuff coming.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's so many ways to talk about good stuff coming. I mean, think about the cell phone. Think about the video game. Think
Yeah.
about drones. Think about, watching the videos. Think about X Games. Think about like all these things we love to do. Science and technology underpin a lot of it. If you didn't
Yeah.
have it, you wouldn't be able to communicate. So there are lots of fun ways to keep that next generation excited about pursuing scientific or engineering kind of careers and being positive about the planet and the bit that they can do. There is one more thing I do want to say before we close, though. One of the biggest problems, Dr. Bose, is we as humans don't do well with scale,
Yeah.
either on the really small or really big. So why do people wear seatbelts? Yeah, you get a ticket from a police officer, maybe, but most of us know somebody who was in an accident and got into either seriously hurt or if not passed away because they weren't wearing a seatbelt, right? There's an immediate, oh, it'll save my life.
Yeah.
One of the fundamental problems with climate science is it's so slow and the changes are so small. At the end of the day, we're gonna die, me and you, and I'm not a negative person, so I'm not putting this on you, but at some point we will die.
Of
We'll
course.
be
We'll be
planet's
fine.
gonna be fine.
Absolutely.
It might get a little warmer. There might be a little more forest fires in Cali, and but overall, we're middle class-ish or so and doing well. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's our great grandchildren that might be feeling stuff really bad and beyond that, right? So it's so hard to think in the future. As
Yeah.
much as we love our kids and we say we love our grandchildren, it's so far in the future. That's one. And then two, the changes are so incremental. When you walk up to an average person and say, "Oh my gosh, do you know that in the last 50 years, the sea level has risen by a half a millimeter?"
Yeah.
Oh, the ocean. It's like, huh? We can't compute on that.
No.
We have a ruler. We know what half a millimeter. Like, get out of here. Or the temperature. This is my favorite. Oh, Frederic, you're telling me that the planet warmed by half a degree Celsius in the last 30 years? The
Yeah.
next thing I got a slap across my head. Who cares, right? Because when you're home, you turn on your thermostat, you're not turning it off a half a degree. You're either cranking it up or down by 5. Like we don't. So even though we know the rhetoric, and even though those of us who really care about the science are like, okay, I get the science, it's still so hard to really make it relate to us because we don't do good on scale. It's like space. When people talk about space, oh, is there life in outer world? Absolutely. Just do the math on how many M-class planets there are. You're
Yeah.
talking billions of planets that circulate suns like ours. Like statistically, we're not the only people alive here, right? But we don't do well on scale. So we're like, no, 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 we're special. It's just us on planet Earth and that's it. We just don't do scale well. And that's a fundamental thing that's always going to be creeping up to try to get everybody to row together on dealing with climate change. Some people just don't feel it, don't see it as relevant in their lives.
Well, I think I've had the most enjoyable podcast for a very long time. In fact, forever. I'm going to say that. And you've made my mum very happy. because she always wanted me to be a doctor. So we call him Dr. B. I'll take that, Dr. B.
Listen, Mama Bose, it was a pleasure to speak to Sumit, Dr. B. Bose. You say this was enjoyable for you. This was super exciting for you. You're wonderful.
Listen,
I will talk with you anytime.
Listen, Frederic, I want to get you back on again because I think you've really brilliant communicator. We never have enough of this stuff. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And I think our audience will love it. Thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure. Have me back anytime.
Absolutely.
Go
Thank you very much, audience. That's the end of this podcast. Tell us what you thought about Frederic's thoughts. I think he said a lot of good sense. Check out COSI, COSI. Find it on the internet. He's a very dapper scientist. He's better than Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's the man to watch. Thank you very much for your time.
Always a pleasure. You take care.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.